Okay. Hello, everyone. In this video, we wanted to talk about the scatter-gather pattern. And in the scatter-gather pattern, there are two steps. There's scattering, and then there's gathering. And I know it's in the name, but you'll see that the name is literally all it is. So we have a manager sensor here, and it's connected to these sensors. It can send queries and events to these sensors through these channels, right? It could just request stuff like temperatures. So if we were to implement the scatter-gather pattern here, right, we can have the manager sensor scatter essentially by asking each one for its temperatures, right? Send some requests saying, hey, I want your temperatures. Then these sensors respond with their temperatures back to the manager sensor. And the manager sensor then gathers those responses and can create some report, right, of the responses.
Yeah, exactly. And you might be thinking this looks a lot like what we did in the last lab, but the scatter-gather pattern is a little bit different than sending a query to each one of these and waiting for a response. So with the queries, if you were to do that and let's say sensor 3 was down and it wasn't connected, or for whatever reason it wasn't able to respond, then the manager sensor would block and it would wait until either the query failed or until it got a response from sensor 3. So the scatter-gather pattern is asynchronous, and in this, instead of a query, the manager sensor would send an event to each of the sensors, and then each of the sensors would take those events and process their data, and then send another event back to the manager sensor with their temperature. And then the manager sensor would, like Beto said, collect that and generate a report.
So now let's run through an example where you might see some issues that you can run into trying to implement this scatter-gather pattern. So let's say the manager sensor, right? He sends a request for temperatures, right? We'll call it report 1. Report 1's out and it goes to each one, right? He's asking each one for their temperatures. Sensor 1, let's say, can just respond immediately. Boom, here's my temperature. Sensor 2 as well. Boom, here's my temperatures. But sensor 3,
yeah, let's say sensor 3 is busy. He's got a lot of requests he's got to fill, and the scatter-gather request just gets put on his queue, and it's going to be a while before he can respond.
Right. And then manager sensor is like, right, he's already gathered sensor 1 and sensor 2. He's got this report with just them inside of it. But let's say there's some rule inside of it that says, please ask these sensors for their temperatures every 5 seconds. And sensor 3 just still hasn't gotten to its response. Manager sensor could send, right, he could get to the next 3 seconds and start sending another request. Sends it to sensor 1, sends it to sensor 2, and then sensor 3.
So now sensor 3 has a second scatter-gather. Let's say it just barely gets back to handling this first one, and it sends its response back to the manager sensor.
Right. If you're not careful, right, your manager sensor might accidentally mistake its second request with sensor 3's response to the first one, right? And then you just have inconsistent data. It's not true. And then who knows, maybe this one gets lost or something. It never gets recorded. So in this implementation, you need to introduce something called a correlation identifier. And so in the correlation identifier, you can include some, right, this identifier could be UUID, anything like that, but it can be included in the request when it was first sent to the sensors. And then these sensors can respond, also including that same correlation identifier to the manager sensor, so that when the manager sensor starts doing its gathering, right, it can use that correlation identifier to know where the responses belong.
And that solves the problem we have with this being asynchronous. Any sensor could respond whenever it's able to, and the managed sensor knows how to handle that and put it with the correct report.